Hey, hi all, welcome back to the channel again. Today we are going to discuss about rendering Angular components dynamically, how we can show or hide components dynamically. And Angular actually allows us to render or to load particular components dynamically, to the host where it is being consumed. And there are two ways using which we can do this thing or we can achieve this thing. The first one is ngComponentOutlet and the second thing is view container ref. So regarding container ref, we are going to discuss this thing in the next lecture. But in the today's lecture, we are going to understand ngComponentOutlet. So I'll give you a brief information about it. So ngComponentOutlet is actually a directive, structural directive we can say. It actually helps us to create components dynamically and embed that particular component's view to the host where it is being consumed, right? And ngComponentOutlet, if you want to use, you need to import common module in order to make it work, as we have learned about ngIf, how we have imported a common module to use ngIf. So if you don't know about it, you can watch the previous video where I have actually explained conditional content projection, and there we have used it. In today's lecture, we are on clicking of these two buttons, we are showing the components. Like if you click on this button, we will show the admin component. If you click on show user button, we will show the user component below this line. Okay, this is the plan, but now it includes input property which needs to be sent from this parent component to the child component, right? And the rendering logic we will write in that particular child component itself. Okay, so to catch this input value in the child component, we need @input decorator to be available inside the child component, right? So for that, if you look at the Visual Studio Code, we have added the intermediate component as a child component. So now this is a direct child of our root component. As you can see, the selector has been used over here, right? So now what we need is, once you click on these buttons, if you click on the show admin button, we want to pass a value as an admin to this particular component, and then this intermediate component accepts that value, and based on that value it will gives us that particular component. So let's add two components. The first one is admin component and the second one is, let's say, user component, right? So we have added user component and admin component. Now we don't need to touch these two components because we need to render whatever boilerplate code we have inside it, just to showcasing the rendering of components dynamically. Now whatever we need to do, we need to do inside this intermediate component, because this intermediate component is responsible, or is handling the execution of these two components based on the input value. So first of all, we need to add the input value in the intermediate components TS file. So let's add that input value. So we need to use @input decorator over here. We already imported it from Angular core. Now let's give an example of a user. It can have a name of type string, and it can have is admin boolean value of type boolean, right? So what we will do, we will just write down one method, get component, and here we will check this dot user dot is admin is there, then return the admin component, else return the user component. Okay, now we need to return something, right? So we need to add the return statement to this function. Now one more catch over here, in the intermediate components HTML, we are adding the ng container over here. So if you do not know about ng container or ng template or ng content, I would recommend you to watch the content projections videos. There are two videos. In first video I have explained you the ng content behavior, and in the second video I have explained you ng template and ng container behavior. Now let's use the structural directive, that is nothing but ng component outlet, and we will give the value of it is nothing but this function. Now as you all know, as I told you earlier, this ng component outlet actually instantiate whatever component written by this function, and it embeds that component's view to the parent view where we are calling the intermediate component, right? So this is how the flow is. So let's add ng component outlet module from Angular common. Import ng component outlet from Angular common, and we need to pass this as a imports array. Now if you need to import this module, and you need to pass this into the imports array so that this ng component outlet should work. So this directive resides in that module, so we need to import that module in this particular component itself, right? So this is all we need to have in the intermediate component. Now it's time to pass the value for this input variable. So from where we are passing it from the app.component app.ts file, where we are consuming that intermediate component, right, as a selector in the app.html. So let's add the variable of type user. So let's say user is equal to an object. First string is name, for example admin. Then we have is admin key over there, which is a type of boolean. So let's say its value is false. First of all, let's add one more variable is valid of type boolean. The value of it is actually false. First of all, now we need to add a click event handlers on this function, on these buttons, right, to update the value of is admin. Let's add a click show admin function over here, we will call, and let's add a click for this as well. We'll call show user on this button click. So let's add this show admin and show user methods over here in the ts file. This dot user dot is admin is equal to true. It will make it true, and again it will make it is valid as true as well. This dot is valid equal to true. The same thing we need to make it false in the case of show user. So now we will add this method over here. For this method we will make this is valid as true, but this dot user dot is admin we will make it as a false, right? So we are updating this value. Now it's time to pass this property as an input to this selector, right? So this selector is nothing but we have an intermediate component selector over here. So we have passed the user property as a value to this input property we have in the intermediate component, right? You can see the type is name and is admin is true. So we have created with the same type like this video this property. Now as we have done everything, let's head over towards the browser and let's see. As you can see, ng component, like the user component, has works because we did not set the validation over here. So let's use validation ng if is equal to is valid, right? Now for ng if to work, we need to import the common module, right? So we have already imported that module over here, right? And we have passed that module to the imports array. So that's the reason ng if is working. Now you can see the valid value is false. That's the reason nothing has been rendered over here. Let's click on the show admin button. You can see the admin component has been generated. click on the show user button, the user component has been created and rendered for us. So it's ng component outlet's responsibility, which is instantiating these components, and it's actually embedding that component's view into app.component, right? That is nothing but a root component. So this is how rendering components dynamically is. So whenever, just keep in mind, whenever you want to render something dynamically, it is 100% based on some user action only. So without user action, you cannot render dynamically, right? So the user action we take, we actually took in the place is nothing but the clicking of those buttons. So by clicking on those buttons, we are changing the isAdmin value over here, and based on that isAdmin value, we are returning the components. And to render these components, we are using ngComponentOutlet over here, which instantiates whatever components it is getting from this method based on value, and it embeds the view of that particular HTML on the app.html. So as you all know, ng container is nothing but used to group certain elements. It does not render on the UI. So what is rendering on the UI? The intermediate component is rendering on the UI, as you can see over here in the app.html file, right? So inside this app intermediate component, we can able to see the paragraph, as you can see over here. App intermediate component, it is directly rendering the app user component over here for us, right? And if you click on show admin, the app admin component gets rendered inside the app intermediate component, because app intermediate component does not have its own HTML. It's just using ng container to satisfy certain conditions, right? So that's the reason ng container does not render on the UI. It renders directly whatever components view it is getting using ng component outlet, right? So this is how ng component outlet works, and it actually helps us to generate or render components dynamically based on certain conditions only. Okay, so I hope you have liked this video. If you like it, so you can hit like on the video, share this video with your friends, and do not forget to subscribe the channel, and click the bell icon so that you never miss any new updates coming from this channel. Thanks all guys. Let's meet in next video.